Hello, welcome to the second part of Hacking Trusted by VanLab. So right now we are going to try to escalate our privileges from a simple user to domain administrator in this lab.trusted.vl domain. So what I want to do first is create two files, one for valid domain usernames I found and another one for valid domain passwords. And that's very important because in real engagements you might be able to compromise dozens if not hundreds of passwords, and it's nice to keep them all organized like this in files, because life gets a lot easier if you try to spray credentials, if you try to reuse passwords for various users, or if you try to reuse credentials for various domains. So it's really important to keep the compromised credentials organized in files. So the first thing that we could probably and should probably check is if this set of credentials is also valid for the other domain, for the parent domain. So let's go and use it to the other IP address. And we can see that Eric is not a user for the trusted.vl domain. So we should probably try and do some nice stuff in this lab.trusted.vl domain and then try to move to the parent domain. So right here we are in the post compromisation phase, because the compromisation of the domain is when we acquire a valid set of credentials. Now, these credentials might belong to a very, very low privileged user. Okay, sorry for the phone calls and sorry for the interruptions. So right now we are, these are my notes for pen testing various Microsoft stuff. Okay, so we have finished the initial foothold and compromisation phase, and right now we will move to the post-compromisation domain enumeration. So since we have a valid set of credentials, we can actually enumerate the whole domain. And you know, I've mentioned it in other videos, but it's important to repeat, because it's important to keep in mind that Active Directory's most prominent vulnerability lies in its very own nature. Okay, we're talking about a directory service which is meant to bring together thousands of users, computers, services, and make it easy for them to work together, make it easy to find resources and do various administrative stuff. So this means that even a very low privileged user is able to see everything else in the domain. A very low privileged user is able to find other users and start enumerating the domain for various misconfigurations. Okay, so right now, since we have some credentials here, we could start using Linux tools, because we obviously don't have a foothold somewhere, and see if we can start enumerating the domain. So I'm going to use the Python version of Bloodhound. It's a neat tool to keep in mind. And I'm going to start playing around with the parameters here so that I can enumerate the child domain to find some interesting information. And here we have I hate Eric, where is Eric, and our Smith. So if we launch it, we can see that it finds some interesting stuff. Okay, we can exit here. We can clear this stuff up, and we can start our bloodhound right here. Okay, I think it has finished. Cool. If we go to, I'm going to go to my, you can see various hacking stuff here. Okay, so it has produced this zip file. It has various JSON files in there. So if we log in to Bloodhound, okay, let's make sure, yeah, our database is empty. Now let's upload this zip file here. It will unzip it. Okay, it has various files, groups, domains, users, containers, operational units, group policy objects. Bloodhound is one of the most important tools that you have to know when you're pen testing Active Directory, although it's not always feasible to use it because it's very loud. So if we go here and refresh the database stats, we can see that they have successfully been imported. So let's go and find our user, which is our Smith, and let's mark him as owned so that we can use him as a point to further escalate our privileges. So there are various Active Directory misconfigurations that we can exploit, okay? And we should start looking for possible. Okay, so when we manage to compromise a user or a service or a computer account, probably the first thing that we should check for is see if we have outbound object control permissions. Okay, so this right here will tell us if we have any permissions over another user, service, or computer account, and we can see that we have a first degree object control over one other object, and we can see that we have the force change password for eWalters. Okay, so if we right click here and press help, Bloodhound can really show us everything about this misconfiguration. Okay, so we can see that this user can change this user's password without knowing the current password, and we have tabs for Windows app use. Okay, so how can we abuse this misconfiguration if we already have access to a compromised Windows machine? But we can also see how we can do this if we are not inside a machine using Linux machines, and we can also see some important operational security information. So if you're doing an actual engagement where various defenses are in place, or even better, a blue team is watching you, then you should be very careful about these OPSEC notices here, because you don't want to get caught, you don't want to alarm the defenders. Okay, and there are some other references here, video walkthroughs, articles that can really help you understand more of these attacks. Okay. For example, we can see here that Hacker Recipes has a nice article of how we can exploit this misconfiguration. So we can see that Robert Smith can change this user's password. But before this, let's get an overall overview of the domain. So in the analysis tab, you can find various interesting queries here. So we can find all the domain administrators. We have the default domain administrator, but we also have the cPowers user that is a domain administrator. So we should probably mark this user as a high value target. If we search for principals with desync rights, we can see that cPowers is also here, of course, because she's a domain administrator. We can find Kerbrowsable accounts. We don't have. Sometimes the KRBTGT account password can be cracked, although it's not the norm. We could search for as reproducible users. These are custom queries, the certificates. It's really important to import them as well, because they can give you valuable insight on various other misconfigurations. So we can also find, let's see, if someone has, okay, so we can see for a computer, for example, the domain controller, who are explicit administrators, okay, unrolled admins. We can also see something interesting here, that we have a first degree remote desktop user. And eVaulters can RDP inside lab DC. So if we own that user, we can RDP to the domain controller, and that's fantastic, because although we don't know the password of eVaulters, as we saw before, rsmith, which we already own, can reset the password of this specific user. So let's go and try to exploit that. All right. So here we can try and start Googling how we can change an Active Directory account's password from Linux. Okay, of course we already have that information here, okay, but you know, Googling, knowing how to Google for the right stuff is really important as well, because in a case where you don't have something like Bloodhound in your hands, okay, you really need to know how to find ways to abuse something that, for example, you've enumerated via PowerView. Okay, and this right here is a really interesting article. So it says how to reset an Active Directory user password using Linux, and it uses the RPC client tool. Okay. Bloodhound suggests the NetRPC tool. There are similar ways to do the same thing. So let's try and use this right here. I will leave the Bloodhound to you for practice. Okay, let's go right here. I don't think we copied this. So let's paste the right IP address. And okay, so we are going to be asked the password for rsmith, which is I hate Eric. We've successfully logged in, and then we're going to use the set user info2 to change the password for user Walters. Okay, now so this command allows us to set password 123 exclamation mark for user Walters. Remember that this DACL abuse, okay, allows us to reset and change the user's password without knowing the current one. Okay, if you wonder for the 23 code, it has a short explanation here. Okay, you can look it up for further information. So if we press enter, no error has been created, so we're successful. If I try to change, for example, C powers password, we would get the access denied because we obviously don't have such permissions over the C powers password. So we've successfully changed the Walters password, and if we exit, we can try the crackmap exec, but now we're saying Walters and the password is 123 exclamation mark. Yeah, I'm sorry I used the wrong domain controller IP address. So crackmap exec shows us that it's a valid domain password. Okay, so this is a valid set of domain credentials. We've successfully changed the Walters password right here. So what we should do is add this here and add the Walters account here. So we have compromised two accounts. We can mark Walter as owned as well, and if we click on it, we can see that here he has first degree RDP privileges here in LabDC. So we should be able to RDP here. Let's copy this address. Let's set the Walters username, and the password is of course the one that we changed. Let's accept the certificate. Okay, by default, members of the administrator group. Okay, we don't have a right. Okay. Okay, so we cannot RDP here, unfortunately. We're not an administrator. So let's try to do something else. Let's try to use evil winrm and see if we can get access in there, and sure as hell we can. Okay, so we're inside here. We could not RDP because we're not administrators yet. Okay, although yeah, we are in the remote management users, but we can use evil winrm to remotely access this machine. Now, we have managed to access the domain controller, okay, but we're not administrators yet, so we have to gain access as the administrator. So right now we have to find some way to escalate our privileges as a domain administrator. So we can see that eWalters can just RDP or WinRM to the domain controller, but it doesn't have any other rights. So this should be a hint in a CDF environment that it has to do something with the local privilege escalation vector right here. So we could probably search for some interesting system information. Of course, we're not allowed to do that. We can find some interesting files. Okay, we have the Robit cat. Robit is the creator of this box. Now if we try to type user.txt, it says that this is not the flag that we're looking for, and obviously the flag that we're looking for is in the domain administrator's desktop directory, because obviously we need to escalate our privileges to DA. So we could probably upload a win piece here and see if it can find something interesting. But before we do that, we should, consider doing some manual enumeration. Okay, so we can see that it has C powers. In here, it would be valid to counter escalator privileges. We could search for files with hard-coded credentials. There are lots of stuff to do. Now, one of the things I like to do is go to C, because we can find some interesting stuff here. If you find something that looks out of the ordinary, then probably it's worth checking. For example, here we have a very interesting directory saying AV test. So we should consider going in there and search for something interesting. So we have the Kaspersky removal tool. Let's see what this README file says. So it says none of the AV tools tried in lab satisfied, so it's time to clean them up. I asked Christine to run them a few times just to be sure. Okay, who's Christine? Now, I think Christine is C powers. We could see that from the database before, but yes, we can see that from Bloodhound. So Christine ran this tool a few times just to make sure that everything is removed, and it might be worth, investigating if this has something interesting here, like a privilege escalation vector. Okay. Oh, we have, Jesus, we have a write-up here. Nice. Okay. So let's try and see. We can run it. Okay, it produces a log right here. Yeah. Obviously, shit. we didn't use the quotes. So it says right here that you need to have administrator privileges to install this application. So probably this tool is running with administrative rights, so it could be worth interesting to further, investigate it. So let's download this file to our attack machine and see if we can do anything interesting with it. Okay, something is probably wrong here. Now the path is right. Okay, so what I'm going to do is try and download this tool right here and start playing with it in Windows and see if it can provide us with an interesting privilege escalation vector. Okay, so I'm going to pause the video. Probably I'm going to stop the video right here, and I will continue to a Windows machine to analyze this binary and see if we can escalate our privileges.